The disarmament team arrived on a Tuesday. Not that the day meant anything to them. The Vethara Compact had no concept of Tuesday, no concept of weeks, no particular investment in the arbitrary orbital divisions humans had invented to organize their fear of time. But the records would later note that it was a Tuesday because the human who first saw the ships, a woman named Sira Akaffer, 41 years old, former civil engineer, currently running a small logistics office out of a repurposed freight terminal on the outskirts of Accra, looked up from her coffee at 7:14 in the morning and said quietly to no one in particular, "They came early. Not they're here. Not oh God. Not a scream, not a prayer. They came early." The Compact's first integration delegate, a being called Advocate Thesson Vor, would replay that audio fragment 4,000 times before the mission concluded. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. Because a species that had been told 3 weeks ago that an armed fleet was coming to collect their weapons, their defense systems, and their sovereign capacity for organized violence. A species that had, according to every psychological model the Compact possessed, approximately 11 days of viable emotional stability before complete social collapse, had responded to the literal arrival of that fleet with the quiet observation that the schedule had been moved up. Thesson Vor did not yet know what to do with that. Neither did the rest of the galaxy. The agreement, such as it was, had not been signed so much as accepted. That distinction would matter later. The Vethara Compact had made first contact with Earth 14 months prior, an introduction conducted with all the careful diplomacy of a landlord informing a tenant that the building had been sold. Humanity was not the first species to be integrated. It was not the first species to be disarmed. The Compact had been doing this for 600 years, absorbing smaller civilizations, reclassifying them as protected populations, and collecting their capacity for war with the efficiency of a well-practiced bureaucracy. It was, they explained to the UN Security Council, for everyone's benefit. Humanity was young. Humanity was volatile. Humanity had, in the span of a single century, invented both antibiotics and thermonuclear weapons, and the Compact's actuarial models suggested this combination was statistically terrifying. The integration was not presented as a choice, but it was presented politely. The Compact was always polite. What nobody on Earth had said publicly, what no government had officially stated, what no press release had confirmed, was that 3 days after the Compact's initial contact, every nuclear arsenal on the planet had been quietly moved. Not destroyed, not decommissioned, moved, somewhere, by someone. The IAEA had filed 17 urgent reports in the following week, all of which had been classified before reaching anyone who might ask the wrong questions. The Compact didn't know this yet. Sira Akaffer did. She hadn't moved them. She was a logistics coordinator, not a general. But she knew, the way certain people always seem to know things that should be impossible for them to know, through the texture of the silence around a subject, through the specific quality of what wasn't being reported, through the look on the face of a former colleague who now worked for an agency that technically didn't exist. She knew something had happened to the weapons, and she knew that whatever it wasn't panic. That was the part that had kept her awake for 11 days straight. Thesson Vor descended to the surface personally, which was unusual. Integration delegates did not typically make ground-level contact during the collection phase. The collection phase was procedural: scan, catalog, retrieve, transfer. 600 years of practice had made it almost elegant. The psychological support teams would arrive after to help the newly protected population adjust to their changed status. There were programs. There were resources. It was, the Compact believed genuinely, a kindness. But something in the preliminary surveys had flagged. The psychological stress indicators were wrong, not elevated, wrong. The Compact's models predicted a specific signature for a civilization facing disarmament: rising cortisol equivalents, increased aggression in communication frequencies, internal fracturing along previously stable coalition lines. The particular social seismography of a species realizing it was about to become dependent. They had seen it 23 times. It followed a pattern the way gravity follows a pattern. Earth's indicators showed something else. Something the modeling systems kept trying to classify as anomalous calm, before rejecting that classification because anomalous calm implied a baseline that Earth wasn't matching either. It wasn't calm. It wasn't panic. It was something the translation matrices kept rendering as focus, which was incorrect, because focus implied a known target and no target had been specified. Thesson Vor had come down personally because the survey team had sent a message that the senior delegate had read 4 times, trying to decide if it was a technical error. The message read, "The humans appear to be waiting for something. We cannot determine what." Sierra was selected as Earth's integration liaison not by her government. Technically, there were 6 governments simultaneously claiming to represent humanity in this capacity, but by a process that Thesson Vor would later describe as consensus by exhaustion, which was not a category in the Compact's political science databases, but which appeared to be functioning perfectly well. She was not a politician. She was not a diplomat. She had a degree in structural engineering, 16 years of experience moving heavy objects from one place to another efficiently, and a reputation in certain quiet circles for asking the precise question that a room full of important people had agreed not to ask. She met Thesson Vor in a converted conference room in what used to be a UN satellite office, the kind of room that still had water stains on the ceiling and a coffee maker that only worked if you held the button for exactly 3 seconds. She had made coffee before he arrived. She had made enough for 2, despite knowing that Vethara physiology was incompatible with coffee, which Thesson Vor's attaché noted with some confusion. "Habit," Sierra said, when the attaché flagged it. "Make enough for whoever might need it, even when we know they won't." Thesson Vor logged this. He didn't understand it yet. He would later classify it as the first evidence, though at the time it seemed like a small social error. He opened the collection proceedings with the standard language, the timeline, the scanning protocol, the legal framework of integration, the rights retained by protected populations, the support systems the Compact would provide. He had delivered this briefing 23 times. He had refined it over decades. It was thorough, compassionate by Compact standards, and completely clear. Sierra listened without interrupting. She took notes on paper which Thesson Vor found quaint and drank her coffee, and when he finished she looked up and said, "When you scan for weapons, what parameters are you using?" "A reasonable question," he told her. She nodded slowly, the way someone nods when an answer has confirmed something rather than revealed it, and said, "Okay, that's fine." "Do you want to start in the northern hemisphere or the southern?" Thesson Vor had expected. Protest, legal challenge, emotional plea, appeal to sovereignty, veiled threat. The simulation models had given him 17 probable opening responses. This was not one of them. "You have a preference?" he asked. "Southern hemisphere has better weather this time of year," she said, "but I figured it was your call." The scanning began 3 days later. It was, initially, exactly as expected. The Compact's collection vessels moved through their designated grids with practiced efficiency, pulling signatures from the planetary surface and its immediate orbital shell. Nuclear devices, catalogued. Conventional military stockpiles, catalogued. Delivery systems, guidance infrastructure, communication arrays with dual military application, catalogued. The retrieval teams were professional. The Compact had done this before. They knew where species hid things, except the numbers were wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not obviously wrong in the way that would trigger an immediate alert, just slightly wrong. The signature density was lower than the intelligence estimates had suggested. The Compact's pre-contact survey had pegged Earth's nuclear arsenal at somewhere between 12 and 15,000 warheads across all actors. The initial scans were finding approximately 4,000. Thesson Vor reviewed the data personally. He had his teams rerun the scans. Same result. He ordered a deep penetration geological survey looking for underground storage. He found some, but not enough. He ran the numbers again, and the gap kept sitting there calm and unresponsive, like a question that was aware it wasn't going to be answered quickly. He sent for Sierra. She arrived in the same unhurried way she did everything, not slow, not fast, moving at exactly the speed appropriate to a situation she clearly understood better than he did. She sat down. He showed her the numbers. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she said, "You're about 11,000 short." "Yes, that concerns you." "It concerns me that 11,000 warheads appear to be missing from a planetary survey." "Yes," she nodded. "What does your model say about that?" He showed her the model's outputs. It was cycling through possibilities: storage error, scanning parameter error, intelligence estimate error, deliberate concealment. It had currently ranked deliberate concealment at 78% probability and was generating threat response protocols. Sierra looked at the threat response protocols for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "I want to make sure I understand your concern. You're worried we're hiding weapons." "Yes." "From you?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face, not quite amusement, not quite sadness, something that sat between them and didn't have a clean name. "Thesson Vor," she said, "can I ask you something? In 600 years of integration, have you ever had a species try to hide weapons from you? 3 times. What happened? We found the weapons. The concealment added 8 years to the integration process and resulted in significantly reduced autonomy for the populations involved. So hiding things from you is a bad strategy." "Historically, yes." "We know that," she said. "We read the integration records. They're public. Your compact makes them public specifically so incoming populations understand the consequences." He waited. "So," she said slowly, as though working through a problem out loud that she had already solved privately, "if we know that hiding weapons from you is a documented, historically unsuccessful strategy with serious consequences, why would we do it?" Thesson Vor had no immediate answer for this, which was the first time in 23 integrations that had happened. Sierra stood, collected her notes, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow morning, same time." She paused at the door. "I made coffee again. You can leave it if you want, but," she shrugged, "habit." She left. Thesson Vor sat alone in the room with 4,000 warheads worth of absence and a feeling that his threat response protocols were solving the wrong problem. The collection continued. It continued because stopping it would have required a justification. And "we cannot explain where the missing weapons are, therefore we suspect something we cannot categorize," was not a justification the compact's legal framework recognized. So the teams retrieved what they found, logged what they logged, and submitted their daily summaries to Thesson Vor, who read them each night with increasing unease. On the 11th day, one of his junior survey coordinators, a young analyst named Veth Sara who had never run an integration before, submitted a note with her daily report. It was flagged as a personal observation rather than official data, which meant Thesson Vor almost missed it. The note said, "I have been reviewing the human settlement patterns in the areas we've surveyed. I cannot find any evidence of the logistics infrastructure that would be required to move approximately 11,000 objects of that size and mass to any storage location our scans have covered. Roads, vehicles, fuel, personnel records, satellite imagery. None of it shows a large-scale weapons relocation occurring in the last 14 months. The objects were not moved after contact. I believe they were already somewhere we haven't looked. I don't know where that is. I'm not sure the category exists in our models." Thesson Vor read this 3 times. Then he called Veth Sara directly, which startled her considerably because senior delegates did not call junior analysts directly. "You're saying the weapons weren't moved after we made contact?" "I can't find any evidence that they were, sir." "Then where are they?" A pause. "I don't know." But another pause, longer, the kind where someone is deciding whether to say something that sounds foolish. "There's something I keep thinking about. The humans have been on this planet for approximately 300,000 years. They've had industrial-scale weapons manufacturing for less than 200 of those years. But they've had," she checked her notes, "underground construction capability for at least 5,000 years. And their historical record shows they've always been very interested in building things that other people can't find." Thesson Vor felt something he didn't have a precise word for. In humans, it might have been called the moment you realize the map is smaller than the territory. "Pull everything you have," he said. "Everything. I want a new survey, different parameters." "What parameters?" He thought about Sierra making coffee for someone she knew wouldn't drink it, making enough for whoever might need it. Even when she knew they wouldn't. "Look for things that have been there a very long time," he said. Sierra had a brother named Kojo who called her every 3 days. He didn't talk about the integration. He talked about his daughter's school play, about a fishing trip that had gone badly because of weather, about a mango tree in his yard that was finally fruiting after 7 years. Sierra kept these calls short, not because she didn't care, but because she had learned over a lifetime of conversations in difficult rooms that there was a specific value to maintaining a version of yourself that existed outside of the difficult room. You needed something to come back to, something that reminded you what the room was for. She was thinking about this, about Kojo's mango tree specifically, when Thesson Vor came to her without an appointment for the first time. He came alone. No attaché. No legal team. Just him, standing in the doorway of her office with an expression she had come to recognize as his version of disoriented, a very slight softening around the primary optical organs, a hesitation in his postural system that lasted about half a second. He had a data tablet. He set it on her desk. It showed a three-dimensional rendering of subsurface structures, a tangle of tunnels and chambers and connected voids that spread under 3 continents like the root system of something enormous that had been growing for a very long time. "This is under the planet," he said. "Yes. This is not new construction. No. Some of these structures are. Our geological dating suggests," he stopped, recalibrated. "Some of these are thousands of years old." "Some of them are older than that," Sira said, a long silence. "The weapons," he said, "are not in there," she said, which was technically true and technically incomplete in a way that Thesson Vor would not fully understand for another 6 days. "Then what is?" Sira looked at him for a moment. Really looked at him. The way she looked at a structural plan when she was about to explain to an architect that the building they'd designed would fall down, not because they were stupid, but because they hadn't accounted for something the ground was already doing. "Thesson Vor," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it as a genuine question, not as a diplomatic exchange. In 600 years, in all your integration, has a species ever asked you why you don't want them to have weapons?" He frowned. "They often argue for their right to self-defense. That's not what I asked. Has any species ever asked you what you're afraid of?" The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. It was the silence of a question that had never been asked, sitting in the air between them, taking up more space than expected. "We are not afraid," he said finally. "We are cautious," she said. "I know, I've read the framework. 600 years of preventing species from destroying each other. You collect the weapons because armed civilizations are unpredictable, and unpredictable civilizations destabilize the compact, and a destabilized compact is dangerous for everyone. It's not malicious. I actually believe that." "Then you understand." "I understand what you're doing," she said. "I'm asking if you've ever thought about why you're scared." "Not of us specifically, of armed civilizations generally. What happened that made the compact decide this was necessary?" He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to, not yet. "I'll tell you what I think," she said. "I think somewhere in your history something went very badly wrong, and you've been preventing that specific thing from happening again ever since. And I think," she paused, "that it worked. For 600 years it worked. And now you're here, and you've run into a civilization that built a planet full of rooms you didn't know existed, and you're realizing your model might have been missing a variable." Thesson Vor looked at the tablet, at the root system tangle of chambers spreading beneath 3 continents. "What is in those structures?" he asked again. "People," Sira said. "Mostly. And the things people keep when they know something is coming and they're not sure what it will take to survive it." Veth Sara found the first cache on a Wednesday. It was in Greenland, 700 meters below the ice sheet, in a chamber that her adjusted geological surveys estimated was approximately 800 years old. The chamber itself was empty, but the infrastructure around it, power systems, climate control, access tunnels, had been refurbished within the last 3 years. Someone had been inside recently. Someone had taken something out or put something in, and had done it with such practiced care that the surface showed nothing. She found 17 more chambers like it in the next 4 days. All empty, all recently maintained, all with access histories that could not be reconstructed because the access systems didn't connect to any network the compact's scanners recognized. She filed her report. She flagged it highest priority. And then she added a personal note at the bottom, the way she'd done before because she couldn't stop thinking about something. The note said, "I've been thinking about something the liaison said in a briefing transcript from day 3. She said, we make enough for whoever might need it. She was talking about coffee. But I've been looking at these chambers, and I think she might have been saying something else. I think, and I know this is outside my analytical brief, I think the humans have been preparing these spaces for a very long time. Not for a specific threat. For any threat. For whatever came. And I think whatever was in them was moved before we started scanning, not because they were hiding it from us, but because hiding it was already a habit they didn't need to explain. Vethsara submitted the report and then sat for a long time, thinking about a civilization that builds rooms in the dark against futures it can't name, and whether that was something to fear or something to grieve. She hadn't figured it out yet. She wasn't sure it was possible to figure out from the outside. The thing Thesson Vor hadn't told Sira, the thing the compact hadn't included in the public integration framework, was that 3 previous protected populations had been reclassified as contained populations after concealing weapons. Contained was not a word the compact used in public materials. It meant something different from protected. It meant a permanent ceiling on development, perpetual monitoring, a kind of civilizational house arrest that had lasted, in the longest case, 300 years. Earth was 4 weeks into a 6-week collection phase. The missing weapons remained missing. The empty chambers remained empty. The humans continued to be cooperative, organized, and unflaggingly capable of behaving in ways that the psychological models did not predict. Thesson Vor made a decision that he did not log officially. He went back to Sira alone, without his legal team, and he told her about contained status. Not all of it. The part that mattered most, what it meant for a civilization that was reclassified, what the ceiling felt like when it descended. He told her because, and this was a decision he couldn't fully explain to himself, he had begun to believe that this woman already knew more about what was happening than he did, and that continuing to withhold information from someone with more information than you was a specific kind of foolishness that he was too old to keep committing. She listened. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. She looked, instead, like someone checking a figure she had already calculated. How many contained populations are there currently? She asked. That information is, how many? A pause, 3. And in 600 years have any of them ever been reclassified back? He was quiet. Thesson Vor. No, he said. She nodded. She looked out the window of the converted conference room, the across skyline early morning, the specific quality of equatorial light that made everything look slightly more permanent than it was. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it as information rather than as a threat, because it is not a threat. It is just accurate. He waited. If you reclassify Earth as contained, she said, the compact will spend the next 300 years trying to maintain a ceiling over a civilization of 8 billion people who have been building rooms in the ground for millennia. You won't find the weapons in your 6-week window. You won't find them in 6 years. Not because we've outsmarted you, your technology is better than ours, and given enough time you probably could find them. She paused. But the people who built those rooms knew they might need to stay in them for a very long time. And the things they put in them, she stopped, chose her next words with visible care, are not what you're looking for. Then what are they? Seeds, she said. Enough food for 8 billion people for 3 years, medical supplies, libraries, engineering materials. The things you need not to win something, the things you need to continue after everything else has been taken away. The silence in the room was complete. Thesson Vor thought about his threat response protocols and their assumption that a disarmed species was a safe species. He thought about 600 years of integration and the 23 civilizations that had handed over their weapons and accepted their protected status and adjusted, perhaps a little sadly, perhaps with some resentment, to their new ceiling. They had been safe. They had been stable. They had stopped being unpredictable. He thought about what Vethsara had written. I think whatever was in them was moved before we started scanning, not because they were hiding it from us, but because hiding it was already a habit they didn't need to explain. You moved the weapons, he said, not an accusation, a realization. Some of them, she said. Where? She looked at him. Somewhere your parameters don't cover. He felt the map shrink again and the territory expand past its edges. Why? If you understood the consequences, if you knew that concealment would. Because the weapons were never the point, she said, and her voice carried something he could not classify, not defiance, not anger, something older than both. The weapons are what you came for. The weapons are what every species gives up when the compact arrives, and then they're safe and stable and they stop building rooms in the dark because there's nothing left to prepare for. And in 300 years they still have their ceiling and they've forgotten the rooms were ever there. She paused. We moved the weapons because we needed you to look for the weapons. While you were looking for the weapons, you found the rooms, and now you know the rooms exist, and now you have to decide what the rooms mean. Thessenvor stared at her. This was deliberate, he said. This was from the beginning. We've known you were coming for a long time, she said quietly. Not you specifically, something like you. Something that would want to decide what we were allowed to keep. How long? She didn't answer immediately. She reached into her bag and put something on the table between them. It was a small piece of paper, folded many times, soft at the creases from being opened and refolded. She didn't unfold it. She just left it there. My grandmother's grandmother wrote that, she said. It's a list. A list of things a person needs to survive if everything they built has been taken. She wrote it during a war that was going to destroy everything, and she was right, and the things on the list were what let her family continue. She paused. It's been updated by her daughter and me, and I'll give it to my daughter someday. The list changes because what a person needs to survive changes, but the practice doesn't change. She stood and picked up her coffee and looked at him with something that was very close to compassion. You came to disarm us, she said. But Thessenvor, we were never armed in the way you were looking for. The weapons were real, but they were the smallest thing we've been maintaining. He called the full session. Not a legal session, a genuine analytical session. Every department head, every senior surveyor, every psychologist and cultural analyst the Compact had assigned to the Earth mission. 31 specialists and Thessenvor at the head of the table, and a question he had never had to ask in 600 years of integration work. What do we do with a civilization that cannot be disarmed because what we came to collect was never the source of their capacity for continuance? The session ran for 19 hours. At the end of it, nobody had a clean answer. They had something stranger, a new category added to the Compact's integration framework for the first time in living memory. Not protected, not contained. A third option that had no name yet because naming it required understanding what it was, and what it was kept expanding every time they thought they'd caught the edges. Vethsara, who had been invited to the session at Thessenvor's specific request, another departure from protocol that nobody challenged because the protocols were clearly not built for this, submitted a final note that was read aloud at the closing of the session. It said, "We have been treating the weapons as the problem. The weapons were bait. The real question is not what the humans are willing to give up. The real question is what they have been quietly maintaining for longer than our Compact has existed, and whether a species that can sustain a 10,000-year emergency preparation posture across generations of complete civilizational change without centralized coordination, without a governing body mandating the practice, without even a name for what they're doing, whether that species can be said to be armed or disarmed in any framework we currently possess. I don't think our framework currently possesses it. I think we need a new one." Sira was on the phone with Kojo when Thessenvor came to her office on the last day. She held up one finger one moment and finished the call. Kojo's daughter had gotten the lead in the school play. The mango tree had fruited again. He was going to make something with the mangoes for the neighbors. He didn't know what yet, something they could share. She hung up. She looked at Thessenvor. He had a document with him. He set it on the desk. It was not the standard integration framework. She could tell from the weight of it, from the specific quality of his expression, that half-second hesitation in his posture, deeper now, more settled, like something that had been resistant had learned to bear its own weight. "We're not proceeding with contained reclassification," he said. "I know," she said. How? You're here alone again. You don't bring your legal team when you're not proceeding with a legal action." He made a sound she had learned to recognize as his equivalent of a rueful breath. "We've created a new category," he said. "It has no name yet. What does the document say?" "It says that Earth's integration will be paused at current status pending a full reassessment of the integration framework's applicability to a class." He paused. "To a civilization demonstrating characteristics outside existing classification parameters." "That's a very long way of saying you don't know what to do with us." "Yes," he said. "It is." She nodded. Outside the window, Accra was moving through its morning, the specific irreducible chaos of 8 million people conducting the business of being alive. She had been watching this city from this window for 4 weeks, and she had thought more than once about how it would look to someone seeing it for the first time, how it might look chaotic, how the patterns in it, the ones that kept it functioning, the ones that had kept cities like it functioning for 5,000 years through fire and flood and invasion and disease, and the specific endless human capacity for inflicting catastrophe on themselves. How those patterns might be invisible to a model designed to look for something else. "Thesson Vor," she said, "can I show you something?" She took him outside. She took him 3 blocks from the office, to a market she had been going to every morning since the integration talks began. A small, loud, brilliantly disorganized market where 40 different kinds of food were sold by people who had been selling food in this specific location, or within walking distance of it, for longer than any official record captured. She bought 2 cups of coffee from a woman named Abina who made it with condensed milk and a spice combination that Sira had never been able to fully identify and had stopped trying to. She handed 1 cup to Thesson Vor. "You can't drink it," she said. "I know, but hold it for a minute." He held it. He looked at the market. He looked at the people moving through it, not in any directed way, but with the specific, legible purposefulness of human beings who know where they're going even when they look like they don't. "Every one of these people," Sira said, "knows something that isn't written down anywhere. How to do something. How to fix something. How to grow something or cook something or build something or find something when nothing else is working. It's in their hands. It's in the things they taught their children without calling it teaching. The Compact survey can't find it because it doesn't have a signature. It doesn't emit anything. It just," she paused, "continues." Thesson Vor held the coffee cup. The steam rose from it in the morning air. "This is what we maintain," Sira said. "This is the thing we've been keeping in rooms in the dark. Not weapons, not even food or medicine, though those too, the knowledge of how to continue. The absolute, irrational, persistent, completely uncoordinated refusal to allow the conditions of survival to be entirely owned by any single structure that could be taken away." He was quiet for a long time. Around them, the market moved. Abina was arguing good-naturedly with a man about the price of something wrapped in leaves. 2 children were running between stalls in a game with rules that existed only between them. An old man was repairing a motor with a tool that was technically a fork. "You are afraid of us," Thesson Vor said finally. "Not a question, not an accusation, something else." "Not of you specifically," Sira said. "We're afraid of what happens when the capacity to continue gets taken away and then something goes wrong. We've seen it happen, not to the Compact, to ourselves, to each other. We've watched each other take things away from each other and then discover that the thing we took was load-bearing. And the people it was taken from had to find a way to rebuild the capacity or they stopped existing." She looked at the market. "We've been on both sides of that, more times than we can count. And somewhere along the way, we don't know exactly when, we decided the only thing that was truly ours was the practice of preparation itself. Not what we prepared, not how, just the decision to keep preparing, to keep the rooms, to keep the lists, to keep making enough coffee for whoever might need it." She turned to look at him. "You can't disarm that, not because we're hiding it, because it isn't a weapon. It's a relationship with time, with uncertainty, with the specific human understanding that everything we build can be taken, and the thing we need to survive the taking is always going to be something smaller and older and harder to see than the thing that was taken." Thesson Vor looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. He could not drink it. He understood that. He held it anyway. The warmth of it transferred through whatever served him as a palm, and he stood in an African market on the 3rd planet of an undistinguished star system, and he held a cup of something meant for whoever might need it, and he began, slowly, with the specific discomfort of a model encountering data it was not built to hold, to understand what he had missed. The Compact's reassessment would take 4 years. The new classification, when it finally received a name, was translated awkwardly into most Compact languages. The closest rendering in the standard diplomatic tongue was something like enduring cultural substrate, which was accurate but somehow missed the weight of the thing it was trying to describe. Veth Sara, who had been promoted twice during the 4 years and was now leading the new division the reassessment had created, privately referred to the classification in her personal notes by a human word she had learned from a recording of Sira Akafer using it in a briefing. The word was grit. She was never fully certain she understood it correctly. She used it anyway. Earth's integration remained paused. The weapons that had been collected were not returned. That would have violated the framework entirely, but neither was any ceiling imposed. The empty chambers remained empty, and then slowly, without announcement, they began to fill again with different things. Seeds and libraries and medical manuals and the specific, irreplaceable knowledge of how to do things with your hands when nothing else is available. The lists were updated. The rooms were maintained. The practice continued, as it had continued through 5,000 years of everything else, without coordination, without mandate, without a name for itself. Sierra retired from the liaison role 2 years into the reassessment. She went back to structural engineering, which she had always found satisfying in a way she couldn't fully articulate. The particular discipline of understanding what a structure actually needed to bear its own weight before you started deciding what it should look like. She called Kojo every 3 days. His daughter was in her 2nd year of university. The mango tree was still fruiting. Thesson Vor sent her one message 18 months after the mission concluded. It contained no pleasantries and no diplomatic framing. It contained 3 words followed by a question that he had apparently been holding for some time. The 3 words were, "I understand now." The question was, "When did you know we were coming?" She read the message twice. She thought about her grandmother's grandmother, folding a list into a small square of paper during a war that was going to take everything. She thought about the specific quality of knowledge that lives in hands and in practice and in the decision, made and remade across generations without anyone ever calling it a decision, to keep the rooms, to keep the lists, to keep making enough for whoever might need it. She wrote back one sentence: "We didn't know it was you. We just knew something always comes, and we decided a very long time ago that we weren't going to let it find us unprepared." In the Compact's archives, in a section that had not existed before Earth's integration, there is a single annotation appended to the opening record of the mission. It was added by Thesson Vor himself, which is irregular. Senior delegates do not annotate mission records personally. The annotation reads, "Classification error, initial." We identified Earth as a civilization requiring disarmament. We were wrong about the category. Earth is not a civilization that requires disarmament. Earth is a civilization that has never, at any point in its recorded or unrecorded history, allowed its ability to endure to reside in anything that could be taken away by a single external action. We came to collect their weapons. We discovered instead that the weapon, if that word applies at all, is what they are. And what they are cannot be collected. It can only be recognized. I am documenting this because future integration teams must understand. When you approach a species that has been repeatedly stripped of everything it built, and has continued anyway, not through military resistance, not through technological superiority, but through the specific irrational persistence of a civilization that quietly decided to make the capacity for continuation itself into a non-negotiable condition of its identity, you are not approaching a protected population. You are approaching something the Compact does not yet have the language for. I am not afraid of them, but I am no longer not afraid of them either, and I think that difference matters. The annotation is not officially classified, but most Compact officials who read it file it without response. They don't know what to say, neither do their models. Neither, perhaps, does anyone, except a species that has been answering that silence quietly, in rooms the galaxy didn't know to look for longer than the galaxy thought to ask.